We spoke about this a little while yesterday, but let's cross live now to Ukraine and catch up with TalkTV's war correspondent Tom Much, who's on the front line in Kharkiv. Tom, welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Tell us what the state of play is in Kharkiv right now.
So I have just been out on the front lines in this region. I got back a couple of hours ago, and we were embedded with a Ukrainian artillery unit that was facing a Russian assault. Now, they'd initially warned us, look, it's going to be quite hairy. We don't have enough shells. But then about half an hour before we got there, they actually received an emergency contingent. And so they basically had us lined up behind the gun. They fired it about 10 times, and they managed to actually, as they showed us and told us, destroy a couple of incoming Russian technical vehicles, as well as some of their troops, effectively stopping an invasion of that small part of territory right then and there. Now, these kind of little skirmishes happen all the time, but the point that they tried to make to me was, look, we're not even asking you to put your own troops in the ground or put your own country people in harm's way. We are just asking for the shells, the ammunition, the weapons that you promised us. You in the UK and the US and the European Union have promised us over all these years that we've been fighting the Russians. We can do the real hard yards ourselves.
Yes. And so has something changed then, Tom, in the last, say, 6 months? I mean, we went into the winter, I suppose, with Russia not necessarily in the ascendance, but we seem to be coming out of the winter months with Russia in a much better position.
So, look, the big problem that everyone knows about here is the stalling of aid, particularly the $60 billion that's been tied up in the US Congress endlessly for about 6 months now. Now, last year, the Ukrainians were on the offensive. They've been given what they called a mountain of steel, loads of all these tanks and armored vehicles and high-powered rocket launchers, HIMARS, etc., in order to try and basically take back as much territory as they possibly could. However, they rather underperformed expectations. And so they got to the end of last year in a rather weak position, having used a lot of their firepower up. Now, they expected to have that firepower. The EU promised them 1 million shells and has delivered much less than half of that. The US promised it would have $60 billion worth of aid and hasn't delivered any of that. So now they find themselves in a position where Russia has its economy really on a war footing. It's importing hundreds of thousands, possibly more than 1 million shells from North Korea, drones from Iran. And now, while you might laugh at those countries as jokes, actually, in military terms, this stuff works really well on the battlefield. And all Ukrainian heroism in the world can't stop an army that is just much better equipped than they are currently. Hence their continuing plea, just give us what we need to finish this job.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the geography of the battle zones now? Is it mostly concentrated in Kharkiv where you are, or is it still sort of disparately spread around?
So the main fighting is in the east. Most recently, it's been in the Donbass region, which is just a little bit south of where I am. That's where the Russians took Avdiivka, which was a major Ukrainian stronghold that had been on the front line actually for 10 years, since the original smaller Donbass war broke out in 2014. But it's only just really over the last couple of weeks that much of the epicenter of the fighting has switched also to the Kharkiv region. And so this is probably one of the most difficult areas that the Ukrainians are facing. They are kind of lucky with the geography and the fact that Kupiansk sits on a hill. It has a river running through it and kind of encircling the main parts of the city. So there is that sort of defensive terrain advantage. But the Russians have hundreds of tanks, hundreds of pieces of artillery, and they are just willing to sacrifice their soldiers in the tens of thousands to achieve the objectives that they want.
No, of course. Tom, good to talk to you. Look after yourself there. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Much reporting into us from Kharkiv.